snacks there and everything. I'm gonna turn this on. People will be looking at me like I'm nuts, seeing this 8 months from now. Okay, this is lesson 7 of Colorado Contracts and Regulations. We're right by St. Patrick's Day, that's why I look like this. We're having a little party here today, so potluck. And so just kind of bear with me. I don't always look like this. But anyway, let's go ahead and go to your third section. Your third section, and you have your contract to buy and sell. That's the name of our purchase contract in Colorado. It's the contract to buy and sell real estate. And you have a filled out one and a blank one. Pull out both of them. Pull out both of them. You're going to fill out the blank one, and you're going to keep the filled out one. So make sure that you take all of your notes on the one that's filled out, because that's the one you're going to keep. Now this is important, and you'll really be glad you took good notes on this, because these contracts don't change every year. And even if they do, there isn't that much of a change on them. So you can still use this contract for many years to come. Use it as a template for when you're filling out contracts.
The contract to buy and sell, right?
The contract to buy and sell. Residential, yes. Okay, the contract to buy and sell residential. We're going to go over this virtually line by line today. 17 pages. It's so exciting you won't be able to stand it. And we are so spoiled here in Colorado. All we do is fill in the blanks on these. There's some states they don't even have approved contracts. Some states they're different in every county. And here in Colorado we were the first state to have approved contracts. And this is the one you will be using. So, the contract to buy and sell, I hope everybody is there. And let's take a look at this. Up on the upper left-hand corner, well, you see on top there's that big long box up there. Look at that second line. This is mandatory 116. This came into effect January 1st, 2016. This is the most recent one. You guys okay? Some of you lost? Need your name tents out too, guys. All your name tents out. What are you over here for? Wow, cool.
She doesn't like me anymore.
I don't think she ever did.
She was bridging the gap.
I haven't know.
Don't start things that aren't real.
Okay.
Hot
Well,
stove
she doesn't have it. I'm gonna make a copy.
Well, I got some here.
Oh, you do?
Which one don't you have?
She doesn't have the blank.
Really? I may not have a blank one.
I've got mine.
Jennifer will make one for you. I bet you do. I bet it's
Can I have one too?
compacted in there.
Need another one? Anybody else?
Just tell Jen to make a couple copies, unless she already took off.
She was up there second.
She went on a liquor.
Yeah, I know she did. So,
This?
She won't be back.
yeah, I won't see her for a week.
Later.
Okay, guys.
The one we filled out yesterday.
So this contract to buy and sell, again, kind of a weird name, but every state has different names for their purchase contracts, and this is what Colorado's name is. Now, there are actually 5 different contracts to buy and sell in Colorado. There's 5 of them. Okay, let me back up. When we did the questions in our committee for the state exam, we had 6 approved contracts. Then they went to 1 approved contract. Now they've got 5 approved contracts, and on the state exam, guys, you're on your own. I tell you what, it could be any one of those answers. Hopefully all 3 of those aren't on there. It could be 1, could be 5, could be 6. Hopefully just one of those are on the question on the state exam. We haven't updated it for years. So again, if you have to guess, I would say guess 6. Okay, put down 6. If all 3 of them are there, everybody see what I'm saying? It used to be 6 when we did the original questions. Then they went down to 1 approved. Now they got 5 approved. So if they have all 3 of those answers, choose 6. That's when we did originally, years ago. Hopefully that makes sense. And this is kind of hard to read, this one that's filled out, but that's okay. You can make up your own figures in there. You can make up your own sayings, whatever you want to do. Come on. So, the date up there, put down any date you want to. And a date is just this, that's just the benchmark date. It may or may not mean anything. It may not be today, it may not be whatever. When does this contract take effect? It may not be that date. And then we have the agreement. Everybody following this? The agreement.
This might be a stupid question, but on the state, like on the state contracts, is there a regulation of write out March 15th, 2018, 03/15/18? Is there like one that they want to see on there?
A date format.
What do you mean?
Yeah, like a date format.
The only date format that means anything is that second line up there on the left.
Okay.
Up there was mandatory 116, I think that's what you're asking. That's the only, that's not gonna be on the state exam. This is how you know you're working with the right contracts. And next January 1st of 19, it is gonna be 19, isn't it? Wow. They might have a new contract. They don't change it every year. One time they went 9 years without changing this contract. So they don't change it every year. Sometimes they'll change it every year for 9 years. And so we have this agreement. Everybody there? Buyer agrees to buy and the seller agrees to sell the property described below on the terms and conditions set forth in this contract. That line is the contract. The next 17 pages are just detail.
I think she was just asking if it's 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and 4-digit year, or does
Is
it
that,
matter?
is it I don't, what you mean if they have 0515 or something, what do you mean?
Or if you just need the last two digits of the year, or if you need 2018 all written out.
No, it can just be 0515 and then the year, abbreviated.
Look on the one that's already filled out. They have that,
Yeah.
how it.
Hey, we're up to 7 now. Are you ready?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, we have one.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, going to the third section there. Third section, and you've got your buy and sell contract, contract to buy and sell real estate. A filled out one and a blank one. You want to help them on down? Thank you. And then we have the parties to the contract. We have Samuel M. and Amanda B. Bush. And you never put it down like that, ever, ever, ever. You spell out the whole name. It's not Mr. and Mrs. Samuel B. Bush, okay? You spell out their names exactly how they want it on title. And it wasn't until 1920 that women were allowed to go on title, believe it or not. And what happened, they said, okay, we'll let women go on title, but we're going to put the surname first. We're going to put the guy's name first. And what I do, when I do mine, like I did this just for priority state, really, Samuel M. Bush and then Amanda B. Bush. What I do on my contracts, I put the woman's name first. It shakes people up, I love it. I'll get a call from a title company or a lender and they'll go, why did you put the woman's name first? I'll say, because I wanted to. They'll say, well, the surname goes first. I'll say, why? They have no clue. They have no clue. Because in 1920, when they allowed women to go on title, they said, okay, we'll just go on title, but the man's name has to go first. Bull. Put the woman's name first, and then explain to them it's going, yeah, have some fun with it, okay? Now, your employing broker might not know. And so have some fun with him or her. And then we'll take title of this property described below as, what are the 3 ways we can take title in Colorado?
Tenancy in common.
Tenancy in common, joint tenancy, individually, severalty. We're in a buy and sell contract in that third section on that, Abraham, so. Okay, one more time. The 3 ways we can take title in Colorado is severalty, individually, joint tenancy with right of survivorship, and tenancy in common. Now, these people didn't know what they wanted to do. Can we suggest and say most married people take it as joint tenants? No. We cannot suggest, we can explain the differences and have them choose, or tell them to go see an attorney. Well, you don't say most married people take property as joint tenants. You cannot say that, and you will see that on the state exam. So those are the 3 ways we can take it in Colorado. What are the other 2 ways you can take it in other states? It's not in Colorado. What is it where they force you as a married couple to buy property as joint tenancy?
It's a mess. Tennessee by the entirety?
Very good. Tennessee by the entirety, guys. That's not in Colorado. 23 states have it. Colorado's not one of them. Tennessee by the entirety. They force married couples to buy property as joint tenants. You'll probably see a question about that on the state exam, on the national portion, not Colorado. Don't miss it. That's an easy one. Then the 5th kind is all the western states that were under the Spanish law. And what's that called? Community property states. Community property states. Community property states. That's where anything you bring into your marriage remains yours. Anything you get by gift or inheritance during the marriage remains yours. It's what you produce together. That's the community property.
So Jim, can you go over the tenancy, because I don't think I was here.
Yes, let's talk about this again. Let's go through all 5. There's 5 of them, okay? There's 3 of them that apply to Colorado. There's 2 others that apply to other states too. Let's go Colorado's first. Severalty is individual ownership. That's also how corporations take ownership of a property, because the government considers a corporation to be an individual. So corporations take ownership in severalty. Then you have joint tenancy with right of survivorship and tenancy in common, that's our default provision. If we leave this blank and it goes to closing like this, these people will automatically take it as tenants in common. Does that make sense?
So you have severalty, joint tenancy.
Severalty,
in common.
tenancy in common, and joint tenancy are the 3 ways we take in Colorado. Then we have tenancy by the entirety, where the state forces the married couple to take property as joint tenants, forces joint tenancy between married couples.
Tenants by what? Entirety, thank you.
Tenancy by the E-N-T-I-R-E-T-Y, entirety. Tenancy by the entirety. And then we have community property states. Those are the western states that used to be under Spanish law. And they decided whether they wanted to or not. And all of the western states are community property states except for Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. We are not community property states. All the other states out west here are. So is Louisiana, and so is Wisconsin. In Alaska, you have a choice whether you want to be married as a community property state or as a regular marriage. Kind of interesting. So let's keep going here. How about Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah? That's just for nothing on the state exam about that I've ever seen anyway.
Colorado.
But those are the 4 western states that did not go underneath, that were under Spanish law, but they did not elect to go community property at the time. So,
What is the Spanish law?
what's that?
What's the Spanish law?
The Spanish law. Okay, let's talk about that. Craig, somebody help her get going back there. Thank you. Okay, now, Spanish law. Let's talk about this. Spanish law, the old Spanish law said again that anything you bring into your marriage remains yours. Anything you get by gift or inheritance, remained yours during your marriage. It's what you produce together. That's the community property. Any check you bring in their house from working. I have a house, she has a house. She keeps her house, I keep my house in a community property state. But the appreciation on that value could be considered community property. How's that? Does that make sense, guys? You think it's important to know this? I think about everybody you talk to will wonder about it. You're going to ask them when you get to this part of the how would you like to take title? And they're going to say, I don't even know what you're asking me. What a great way to start explaining to people. Profess your professionalism. And then, this contract is not assignable. If it is assignable, if I can assign this contract, I'll put it in the additional provisions section. So this contract, again, is not assignable. When we have the seller's name, we have Brian M. and Lila A. Hardcase. Again, you don't, I put it on there, I put it on there on purpose like that, just so you can see that's not the way to do it, okay? I put the woman's name first, shake things up, put the woman's name and then the man's name. And spell it out. Now, if it's a real common name, you want to spell out their middle name.
So when you said don't do it this way, you have it Samuel M. and Amanda B. Bush, it should be Samuel M. Bush and Amanda B. Bush?
I couldn't have said it better. Exactly like that, Jackie, you bet. So it's going to be, again, you're going to spell out their name exactly like it is, not Mr. and Mrs. Samuel M. Bush, something like that. And ask them, how do you want to appear on title? They might have something else. Maybe the woman wants to go with her maiden name. Can she do that? Of course she can. Of course she can. I'll tell you what happened. You'll enjoy this, Evelyn. I had a Latino couple that I'm still working with. She was over here illegally. And so she bought a piece of property and she put it in the name of some friends of hers down in Mexico. And because she didn't want to be publicized that she owns the house here. And illegal aliens can own property in the United States. And so what happened, they wanted to sell that house. And I'm looking at this title going, you gotta be kidding me, this is a heck of a mess. And it was. So what I did, I turned it over to a title company, and we played with it and fought with this and did this and did that. Finally, last week, they called me up and they said, we got it all squared away. Let's go ahead and list the property. But first time I ran it, like every deal you do, guys, is different. You learn something on every deal you do. I don't care how many deals you have. Really interesting. I don't know if you ever run anything like that?
When I was doing loans, yeah, a lot of people want to put their homes under their children's name using their social security number. And they were not old enough, but they still wanted me to do it, and I said, no, you can't do that. And then they brought in friends, and then I had to tell them, you have to go to a lawyer and make sure that this friend is not the owner, real, that you're doing this deal with his name or her name because they actually own the property, you don't. And if I put your name, you're gonna have to come up with an ID or something. It was difficult.
It is, it's a challenge,
But you know
I'll tell
what?
you.
In Puerto Rico, there was a bank, and they decided to let everyone that had an ITIN get
It had an ID?
ITIN, the
ITIN.
Oh, the TIN number.
Yeah.
Tax identification number, okay.
when the government came out with that, because all of this money that they had there, they needed to be taxed on it, so they had to do something with it. So they gave them not a social security but an ITIN, in order just to get the money out of, to be able to use the money for the government.
That's pretty common, yeah.
So the bank said in Puerto Rico, we will take loans with ITINs, but the percentage was 11 to 14. And they
Wow.
will do it. Well, I did it at 17 when I was in Chicago. My first home, I bought it at 17.9.
17.9%. Mine was 13. I went through chaff and got 11%. And I thought I just had it made, 11%.
Wow.
So when people are complaining because it's 4.5% now, don't talk to me about that. I mean, come on. Or Evelyn.
Yeah, but 11% of 50 grand versus
Oh, I'm just telling you.
4%, 400.
I'm just saying, that's
But at
the
that
difference.
time, the money was still on the level.
That was
Yeah.
back, that was back, because of the Carter days and what happened after that. Remember we talked about that last week in the Federal Reserve? We had Paul Volcker as the head of the Federal Reserve, and he controlled the interest rates by having reserve accounts at the banks, and that shot the interest rate up just through the roof. Then Reagan put in who after Paul Volcker? Alan Greenspan. And he straightened the whole thing out. And finally, by a few years later, we were finally back on a normal keel again. But what a mess that was back then. Trying to make a living in this business doing that. And the way you bought a home is you assumed one. You assumed one. You didn't go get a new loan if you could help it. And then we have the other one here, guys. Then we have the property is the following legally described property in the state of Denver and the county of Denver. And then don't put down this legal description like I have it. Put down for the legal description, defer to original survey. Punt, defer to original survey is what you want to do with that. Defer to original survey.
Where do you put that at?
You write down there underneath the legal description, where it says Block 3, Lot 3, Maplewood subdivision, that's what the legal description shows. But what's happening is a lot of these legal descriptions with the counties are wrong. And so the real estate commission said, let's defer them to the original survey, because every property you have, every house you sell has a survey on it that was done before they started building that house. So you defer to that survey. And then we have known as, and then you put the address of the property. 964 Telluride Street, Denver, Colorado, whatever, that's the address. We hang our hat on the legal description, not the address, because you can change the address. And then, together with the interest, everybody there? Everybody caught up? Together with the interest,
You said defer really quick,
defer to original survey. Defer, or, yeah, just say defer to original survey. That's the simplest way to do it.
Can you do that every time, or are you just using this?
Oh, do it every time. Do it every time, yeah. You don't want that liability. Real Estate Commission recommends we do it this way. And I agree with them 100%. And it says, together with the interest, easement. What's the definition of an easement?
Anything that encumbers, hinders.
No, that's an encumbrance. And what is the definition of an easement? Write this down, guys. An easement is a right to use somebody's property for a particular purpose. An easement, a right to use someone's property for a particular purpose. You guys okay back there? Need some help?
Yeah.
Do you? Are you okay?
No, I think I have the wrong one.
I cannot even understand.
You have a blank one that was filled out?
I'm going over stuff that I heard that's why
You know, I hardly write. I type for a voice.
she felt better, so you wouldn't say. I guess when it comes to this, you just say refer to the survey, which is like the most accurate information in the state, but you still want to check. I don't know, I'm still trying to get up. So,
I think because that's, you know, that's the only, when you're talking about the description, I'm like, okay, I just wrote it right underneath the property line.
Okay. Okay, guys, let's back up. An easement. An easement is the right to use somebody's property for a particular purpose. It's like a driveway. You think about an easement about going across somebody's property, but how about a utility easement? They're not using our property to go across it, they're using it for a particular purpose, aren't they? And they have an easement. And whenever you have an easement, you have a right of procurement. You can use that easement anytime you want to. They can, the meter people, you said you were a meter reader for a while. Yeah. You know, now you have, what do they have? Just something you go over the thing by the street and it just kind of reads it. You have to go in the backyard or anything.
They still replacing them though, so there's still a lot of houses out there, the old analog ones.
Oh, really? The old ones, yeah.
That's what I did, was replace those.
That'd be a very dangerous job.
A lot of bee stings.
Bee stings and dogs and people with guns. You know?
The only time I ever had someone stick a dog on me, I was it was on the corner of a lot, and I heard the back door open, and I heard the dog like bark once and then just start running. So I just hopped over the fence, and the dog was going nuts. And I yelled at the guy, I was like, I'm with XL Energy, I'm not turning it off, I'm just replacing the meter. He called his
man.
dog back.
Oh, man. Okay, guys, so an easement, any questions on easements? Rights, benefits, improvements. What's the definition of an improvement?
The,
Of the floors.
yeah.
That's an example. The definition of improvement is anything man-made.
Oh.
Anything man-made is an improvement. It doesn't have to improve the property. That's the definition. Anything man-made is an improvement. Improvements, everybody got that? And attached fixtures appurtenant, there's that word, appurtenant. Help me out. What is an appurtenance? I'll start you out. Something of value that passes with the property. But, I know you've had this several times. Write it down. Let's write it down, guys. Make sure you get this. An appurtenance is something of value that passes with the property. Something of value that passes with the property, but it's not a part of the property. Something of value that passes with the property.
Could an easement be a pertinence?
And an easement very much could be an appurtenance. We have appurtenant easements we'll be talking about too. Again, appurtenance, something of value that passes with the property, but it's not a part of the property. It's next to, adjoining, or adjunctive to it. Something of value that passes with the property, but it's not a part of the property. It's next to, adjoining, or adjunctive to it. Something of value that passes with the property, but it's not a part of the property. It's next to, adjoining, or adjunctive to it. And all interest in the cellar and vacated streets, etc.
That's a whole lot of Jim.
As you see him double cut me off.
That's
I'm
more
seeing
than
triple,
you.
yeah.
Oh, it's an infinity
Oh my god.
That'll wake you
Is
up.
this what it looks like on your YouTube channel?
And I'm what?
Is that what it looks like on your YouTube channel?
I haven't thought about it.
It does
Here,
look
look
but-
at it.
No, I haven't.
Big 10-gallon cowboy hat. He's got all kinds out.
And
What's that going?
Yeah, I need a green cowboy hat. That's what I need for St. Patty's Day. Anyway,
yeah, it does look a little small.
that's okay.
Maybe just change the snake to a garter snake.
There we go. St. Patty's, there we go. Okay, now, let's keep going here, guys. Now, then we have inclusions. The purchase price includes the following items. And as all these things, if they're on the property at this time, it used to be if they weren't on there, we had to scratch it out and be able to see underneath the letter. It was just really a crazy way. Now, if it's not in there, we don't say exclude it, we just don't say it's there. It's really that simple. So, now, and including all remote controls. One time I had a contract where I put down I had 2 remote controls, and the counter came back, there was only 1 remote control. Now there's a counter you can live with. Something really simple. But again, so just put down all remote controls.
They really countered that?
They did with that. And you know, and I was thinking about the garage remote controls, but you know, there might be for your sound system and who knows what else in there.
Air fan.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Now look at those boxes down there, guys. See that? Those boxes are things that may be leased, and the new purchaser may have to go and renegotiate those leases. Water softeners, things like that. And then inclusions not attached, if on the property, and they have some other things there, window coverings. Most of those are real property items, except the government considers anything that will ever be replaced to be personal property. We consider the carpet and the blinds on the windows to be real property, but not the government, because it will be replaced someday.
Windows?
Not windows themselves necessarily, but the window dressing, what do you want to call them, the curtains, the carpet, anything that'll ever be replaced, the government considers it personal property. And then we have other inclusions and whatever else there is in the price. Put those other inclusions there. Now, well, let's keep going now, we'll talk about this later.
Will this is the contract, the actual contract, when it will actually look like?
This is the contract, yeah.
So will we see this contract on the test?
Oh, no, you're not gonna see this contract on the test, but you're gonna sure see a lot of questions about it.
Okay.
You better believe it. Remember, on the state exam, guys, there's more questions about contracts than any other issue.
How many specific questions?
There's gonna be on the Colorado portion between 20 and 22 questions on contracts. On the national portion, there's gonna be between 10 and 12. So there's gonna be like 35 questions on contracts. There's only 154 in the entire test. So over 20% of the state exam is contracts.
Are they gonna ask like, what appears on line 61?
No.
Okay.
That's a good question though. They're not gonna say what's on line 61 or 62. They're mean, but they're not that mean, okay?
Are they gonna say something like, what is 2-7 usually referred to?
Oh, no, they're not gonna be that specific, what's 2 to 7 we refer to, but they're gonna wanna know, as we're going through here, they're gonna wanna know what an appurtenance is, what is an easement.
And you will always have a choice of 3 words to choose.
4 choices, yeah, one out of 4, one out of 4.
So in this contract, it says Amanda Bush and Samuel Bush are to be determined as to how they will take the property
Yeah.
title. When do they have to determine that?
What if they don't determine it? They never say, then it will default to tenancy in common.
Oh, it always
Automatically. Did
defaults.
you hear that question, guys? Really good question. Remember, we put down to be determined as far as how they want to take title. What if they don't decide how they want to take title? It'll appear in all the closing documents as tenancy in common. But you know what's going to happen? That closing lady's going to call you up and say, hey, find out how these people want to take title. But if it doesn't, goes all the way to closing, that's fine, it'll happen that way. Yep, they're made for you. Look at the top of the next page. Parking and storage facilities, that has to do mainly with condominiums. And then we have exclusions. The Rosebush located northeast corner of the lot. Let's talk about this. There are these story. You guys okay? There are these story questions on the state exam. I hate them. There's 10 of them. They're the last 10 on your national portion. And what you want to do is read the question and then find the question in the story. Okay, but there's one on there that's really tough. It goes like this. The sellers excluded the rose bushes and their prized rose bushes in their rose garden. And so in the listing contract, the broker said, rose bushes to be excluded. And what happened is that they sold the property and the buyer's broker did not put down anything about those rose bushes being excluded. And so the buyers go ahead and they look in the garden one time and here's those rose bushes gone. And they go over to the seller and they say, how come you took those rose bushes? And the seller said, well, because I excluded them in the listing contract. The broker never excluded them in the sales contract. And those buyers never see the listing contract. And so there was a liability issue with that broker who neglected to say that, yeah, those roses go. They don't stay with the property. So when you see that question on the state exam, hopefully a light will come on.
And what happened with that broker?
Well, he had a liability issue. You know,
Have to buy them paper.
it probably wasn't a real huge problem, but you know, probably a few $100, you know, who knows how much.
Okay.
You had to replace them, I'm sure, you know. And things like this happen. If that's the worst thing you ever do, you're way ahead of the game, okay?
So how would a question like that be in the test?
They're gonna say, how do you handle the roses that were handled in this particular scenario? And you have the whole scenario there, the whole story, okay? And it explains it step by step by step.
So
You're
we
gonna
say
be
it's a
fine.
liability.
And then
Pardon me?
You took it as a liability
3.5 hours.
A liability, well, it was a liability.
to the.
Well, it was because the broker screwed up. You know, he didn't put in the contract that those that those roses went with the sellers. And then we have the water rights, well rights, and of course in the city you seldom run into water rights. Seldom run into water rights, but you very well could run into water rights. I see a lot of water rights in Denver, in the main part of Denver. You see, how about ditches, water ditches?
Up where I live.
You see them a lot, guys. You see them a lot here in town, and most of those are private rights. They're not real well rights, water rights. They're usually private, but I've seen some that are actual water rights coming from these irrigation ditches in town. And then we have, what type of deed? Any deed, water right, or whatever will be conveyed by their own sufficient type of deed. Remember, water rights are considered real property in Colorado. We're the only state where water rights are real property. They have their own separate legal description and they have to be transferred with their own separate deed. Yeah, we're the only state that has it like that.
Are mineral rights the same?
Pardon me?
Are mineral rights the same?
Mineral rights, no, not mineral rights. Mineral rights run with the property. In other words, I sell you my property, I have a ranch, and I sell you my ranch. I don't say anything about the mineral rights, you get my mineral rights. But I can restrict them or reserve them in the contract if I want to. I can restrict them
I
or
have a
reserve
question.
them.
One person in my family bought a ranch way up there on the north side, and they found out mineral or oil, something.
Probably.
They are getting a certain amount of money.
If they bought it there and they got the mineral rights when they bought the property, you bet.
But oil and gas companies, I'm going through this right now, my property, they don't care who they pay. If you sign off on it, even if you don't have the rights, they'll pay you and then you're liable to pay the correct party after that. And the other party will sue you.
It's theft, well,
Because we
Yeah,
don't
they'll
think
get
just
charges
on, like,
against
the
it.
Right.
It's theft,
layer.
it's
Yeah.
theft, yeah.
So be careful, because those checks start coming in and you're like, I made $100,000 this year, I didn't even do anything.
Yeah.
And you didn't actually get the rights, so be careful with those.
Very true, very true.
So
It's-
with
Go ahead.
with the water rights, the water deeds, on here you've got NA, but say you're in Park County and there's a well, that's where that comes into play?
This is where the well would be, or whatever. See, wells are not water rights, typically. Some of the big commercial ones are. But wells aren't water rights. Well is a utility interest. In other words, to call a well a water right, it'd be like calling the pipes coming into your house a water right. No, they're not. They're a public utility. Well, a well is a private utility. That makes sense?
Would the license number be transferred there? Because a lot of them do have to be licensed.
The wells?
Yeah.
Oh, you better believe it.
So
Yeah.
that would show up here.
This is where you would put this. Now, down here in the well rights, guys, see, before 1984, in 1984, a lot of wells were dug without permits. And if the main source of water for this house is a well, the seller has to produce a well permit. Even though this well was dug 50 years ago, he's got to go and produce this well permit. The seller has to, if it's the main water for the house. Now, a lot of wells are usually just watering wells, essentially. Back, again, 10 years ago, I think it was more like 25 years ago, we had some real water shortages. And you could only water on Monday, and Mondays, 1 to 3 could, at the end of your address, could water and blah, blah, blah. And if you saw somebody watering on the wrong day, you were required to report them, and they got a fine. So people put these things in the window, and you'll still see them. This is the watered by well water, irrigation by well water. And that well was the water right for that property at one time, but then the public utilities came in, they hooked up to public utilities. Now that well is not the main source of water, so you don't have to worry about the seller having to get the well permit for something like that, because it's not being used for the main water supply for the house. Does that make sense? So let's keep going here. Water stock certificate, if there is one. Again, water rights are so valuable in Colorado. And then conveyances. Now we have the most confusing part of the whole contract, and that's these dates. And your employing broker will go over these dates with you and make sure you understand them. And they made it more confusing by doing it backwards. Go to page 3 and go to line 35. Go to line 35 on page 3. And this is the acceptance deadline date. How long are we going to give these people to accept this contract? Nowadays, the way it is, you want to just give them a day or two. I used to always give a week, but not anymore. Now you're going to just give a day or two because there's so many contracts coming in on these properties. So you just want to give a day or two for the acceptance date.
Do we want to write that down?
On the acceptance date, yeah, you want to put down the date there, okay?
Well, no, I'm saying, do we want to say a day or two, or like a question like that would be on the test?
Not necessarily on the test, but you've got to be real familiar with all of these lines and what they are. This is the acceptance date, when they're going to accept this contract. I'm writing it today. Any more, you give them till tomorrow to get this thing accepted. That's about what you do. But you'll be talking to the listing broker. Remember, you're working with the buyers in this scenario. You're writing the buyer's contract. So you'll be talking to the listing broker and say, how long do you want to give for acceptance? Now, it gets real confusing. Look down at 3.1, a few lines below that. Applicability of terms. They have NA, not applicable. You know what that means. But then they have something else. They have something else, and that's the mutual acceptance date of this contract, the MEC date. And a lot of brokers use that. I like using it. Except when it first came out, I used it a couple of times on some REOs. What's the heck's an REO? What's it stand for? Real estate owned. It means it's owned, it means it's gone through foreclosure, now the bank owns it. And they made me rewrite the contract because they didn't accept an MEC date. So I quit using MEC dates. Now I'm starting to see them more and more again because you don't have a lot of REOs out there. I liked using that MEC date. And your broker can explain more about that. The mutual acceptance of this contract. And then we have the possession date. Most of the time it's the same day as closing. And right above that you have your closing date. With all the paperwork and all the grief that these poor lenders and title companies go through, we haven't gotten buried like these other parts of the industry have as real estate brokers. But many of these lenders and title companies are so buried with paperwork, it's getting to the point where you can't close a deal in 30 days anymore. Figure 45 days. In this case, I did 44 days out to close this deal. And so that's the closing date, 44 days from now. Possession date, same time. Same time. Now sometimes it's 3 days after closing. 3 days after closing, because you have to get all your stuff put together. Maybe it was 100% sure you were going to close this because there were some problems, and so you didn't pack everything. And so you have 3 days to get ready. Here it goes real confusing. You ready? If you're going to be in that home longer than 3 days, you have to have a listing contract, a rental contract, not a listing contract, excuse me, a lease contract with that seller. And they will be leasing from your buyers for after those 3 days.
The post-occupancy agreement, right?
What's that?
Post-occupancy agreement?
The post-occupancy agreement, yes, and the real estate commission is making a big deal about this. Everything has to be in writing. This eliminates a lot of problems. I really agree with the real estate commission on the way they're handling this because you just can't leave that hanging out there. And so you want to, again, put down that closing date, and then you want to put the possession date is usually going to be that same day, but maybe not. It might be 3 days after closing. But if it's going to be longer than 3 days, you have to have a post-occupancy rental agreement. Due diligence forms, those are called. And so we have the possession date and then possession time, 4 p.m., whatever. Okay. Now you have the acceptance deadline, when it's going to close. Now you go back to line 1. line 1 on page 2, the dates and deadlines in section 3 there. And we have the alternative earnest money deadline. Remember, on a typical contract, what am I going to get today? I'm not going to get a certified funds, I'm gonna get a check. I'm going to get a check, and I'm going to make a copy of that check and put it with the contract and send it to the listing broker. Remember, I'm the co-oping broker. I'm working with the buyer. I'm going to send that copy of that check and this contract to the listing broker. I can say this again. Everybody understand that this trail of where how this is going to be working. And so I'm going to have the alternative, and in this case, they didn't even give me a check. They gave me a promissory note. And there's a place in this business for promissory notes. But only make them a couple, 3 days, never over a week, to turn that money, that promissory note into actual cash, to turn it into a good check. I've had it, guys, and I've done this. You'll probably end up doing it, and you're going to kick yourself. They're going to say, well, how about if I just show up with that earnest money at closing? And you're excited about the deal. Say, oh yeah, why not? I'll tell you what, if they can't come up with that money till closing, they're not going to come up with it then either. Kiss that deal goodbye. Don't ever do that. And I've done it. I might have done it more than once, to be honest with you. I try not to make the same mistake more than 8 or 9 times. You know? So.
You need earnest money?
Pardon me?
You absolutely need earnest money to...
Yes.
You better, without it, you don't have consideration. You don't have a contract without that. You need it, yes. It's not a matter of wanting it or being polite. No, you need that. You need that. You need good funds. And then we have the record title deadline. I usually give a week. The title people are the most efficient people in our industry. They'll have the title policy in these people's hands within 3 days after you order it.
A week from the acceptance deadline?
A week from today.
Okay.
Oh, from the acceptance deadline, I'm sorry, what Jackie just said, from the acceptance deadline, yes. Well, whatever your broker wants you to do. And then the record title objection deadline, give 1 more day, 8 days for that. And then off-record title deadlines, these are things that are not a matter of public record. Things like easements possibly, could be several things that are not a matter of public record. And again, give a week for that. And then off-record title objection deadline, 1 more day besides that week, 8 days maybe for that.
What if the 8th day falls on a weekend? Do you extend past the weekend?
We're gonna get to this other part here. What if it's if that day is a holiday or a weekend day? We'll be talking about that. There's a part in here that even allows for that says, are we gonna count these holidays or weekend days as part of the business days? And we make that decision here in just a little bit.
So I have a question, Jim. Where do you get your time frames from? Is that something that you'll get from your managing broker to say, hey, this is how long you need?
That's exactly right. What John's question was, where do we get these numbers from? Experience. And your employing broker will go over these with you, and what he expects to be done or she expects to be done. But after a while, after you've written several of these, you're gonna walk out of here today knowing how to fill out this contract? Are you kidding me? You're gonna fill this out 8, 9 times before you're real familiar with it. We're gonna spend 3 hours on this contract today. You're gonna spend 3 hours going over this contract with your people? Not hardly. You're going to just summarize this. This is what this means, this is what this means. And you can't do that till you know this contract. And you're not going to know the contract well enough to do that till you've filled out a bunch of them. How many have you filled out, Jackie?
2 or 3.
2 or 3?
Yeah.
So you're getting familiar with it now. You asked some good questions. So yeah. But again, until you fill out a bunch of them, and until then, that employing broker had better be looking over your shoulder and showing you what he expects, what he or she expects on these contracts. And so I go through there and say, this is what this means, this is what that means. I just summarize it, blah, 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 blah. Very seldom do you have to read every word of it, unless the people are an engineer. And if they're an engineer, you might have to read it twice. And that just happens. You have to live with them, you know. And it's kind of weird, because I kid around with engineers. I have some of that blood in me. My dad's brother actually graduated from the School of Mines in 1946, #1 in his class in the School of Mines. And about 15 years ago, my brother's kid graduated #1 in his class from the School of Mines. Kind of proud of that. Then he went on to University of Texas and got his doctorate degree in chemical engineering, and he's one of the top battery experts in the world right now.
Wow.
What a thing to be into, batteries. Man, I'm sure he's doing very well. He's on the staff at Berkeley in California, and he's probably 34, 35, and he's finally engaged. Some gal finally nabbed him, you know. Tall, good-looking kid, doctor's degree, making a ton of money, and finally he's biting the bullet, so. Anyway, but what happened, you know, the School of Mines used to be all guys. Now they have women there, and the women are outnumbered some like 30 to 1. 30 guys for every woman. And when you go into the woman's dorm, it's funny, you walk down these steps, and right above the steps there's a plaque up there, and it says, "The odds are good, but the goods are odd." I love it. I love it.
That's awesome.
And then we have the right of first refusal deadline, and this might have to do if you have a home to sell. And then we have the association documents. In this case, there's no homeowners association, so those would just be NA right there.
Wait, I'm sorry, I missed. How long do you give for title resolution and how long for right of refusal?
Oh, the title resolution, give 1 extra day.
Okay.
2 days after the title comes in, you have 2 days for the resolution after that. Now, in real life, like I say, whatever your broker wants you to do.
And the refusal deadline, what's that usually?
And the right, you mean the right of first refusal, that is if you have a home to sell is where that comes into play, but there's a lot of different ways that could come into play also.
Is that negotiable, or is that something we'll see on the test? How long is the refusal deadline?
Oh, it's always negotiable. Yeah, the right of first refusal, and guys, you very seldom even use that. And I've used it where you have a home to sell. We have to have a home to sell. And I'll tell you how this works. So I tell my people, you have a home to sell. I am going to have a contract with you. I'm going to put in your contract that if I get a better offer coming in, like I'm giving you 5 months to sell your house and close it, and then you can close on my listing. But I'm going to have a right of first refusal, where if I can get somebody in here who can close right away, I'm going to call you up and say, I'm going to give you 3 days to make your contract good. In other words, get rid of that contingency about selling your house. And if you can't get rid of that contingency, I'll give you back all your money, but then you're out of this deal. You'll have the right of first refusal. And so, everybody follow what I'm saying? And so now I can take that other contract that I can close quicker than 4 or 5 months from now. Then we have association documents. We have no associations. Then we have seller's property disclosure. And remember, this is voluntary. He doesn't have to fill this out. But the seller expects to fill one out, and the buyer expects to see one. You know, I've only closed one deal. This is one I closed a few months ago, where there was no seller's property disclosure on it. And I always said, I would never close a deal without a seller's property disclosure. And sure enough, here I have one, without a seller's property disclosure. And I'm going, oh, son of a gun. So I gave Ken a call, Ken Ishmael. You guys will all meet Ken, one of the top inspectors in Colorado. He'll be in here in current legal issues. And I called up Ken. I said, Ken, I've got an inspection for you, and I don't have a seller's disclosure. He said, well, that's why you have me. I went, you're right. He's got my back. If there's anything wrong with that home, he knows more about that home than that seller does. That's how good he is. And I said, cool. So I went ahead and closed the deal without a seller's disclosure, something I said I would never do. I still don't want to, but you've got all these people watching your back. The title company, the lender, the inspector, the appraiser, the other broker in the deal. All these people, we're watching each other's back as we're going through this to make sure everything works out well. And the more experienced you are, the less chance you have of making a serious mistake. You'll make mistakes probably in the first 3 years on every deal you do. You'll make a piddly little mistake. very seldom do you make a big mistake, very seldom, and even when you do, it's usually something you can fix fairly easily. So don't get paranoid. Because everybody makes them. And if you could work with another, and the other broker starts berating you because you made a mistake, I'll tell you, remember who that person is. And try to never work with them again. Because they've made their mistakes too. Now they think they're so cool that they don't make mistakes anymore. Bull, they're gonna make mistakes too. But that's why we have each other. Continuing, loan application deadline. So what happens here? I have this thing, and what I'll do, and I know this thing's gonna get accepted, I'm really happy I got a good price on this, full price offer. It's going to be accepted, whatever. What I'll do right at this point is I'll call up the loan originator, and these people already saw this loan originator, didn't they? When did they see him?
Before looking, hopefully.
And what did they get?
Pre-approval letter.
Pre-qualification letter. And the people, and the lender ran all this stuff on them and said, yes, these people should have been able to afford a $400,000 house. So I call her up or whatever, and I say, Janine, do you remember the Bushes? About a month ago, you gave them a pre-qualification letter. Now they're ready to come in and fill out their...
1003.
I love it. 1003, not come in and fill out the loan app, to fill out their 1003. Their 1003, that's a loan application. So you call it a 1003. That way the loan originator will go, wow, I'm working with a broker who knows something? How unusual. And so you set it up for like 4 or 5 days from now. Because you want them in there as soon as possible. Because today they're giving us a deposit, aren't they? An earnest money deposit. When they sit down and fill out their 1003, what else are they paying for that day?
Survey?
Credit report?
Not a survey, what's that?
The credit report?
A credit report, what's that called, Hank?
Tri-merge.
A tri-merge, very good, because there's 3 reporting agencies, and they are
Experian, Equifax, TransUnion.
Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. Write that down, guys, you gotta know that. For the state exam and for real life. The 3 reporting, TransUnion, Equifax, and
Experian.
Experian. It's a tri-merge. It costs $29.50 to get the report from all 3 reporting agencies. And what else will they pay for that day? The appraisal. The appraisal.
Jim, was it the appraisal or the survey that's a 1004?
The appraisal is the 1004. The appraisal is the 1004. The application is the 1003.
I have a question.
What's that?
I have a question.
Okay.
So when do you learn all of this? Which week?
Right now.
I feel like I'm
All
in
the weeks.
Right
I feel like
now.
I'm in
We'll
the wrong
talk
week.
about it. You'll talk about it again.
Oh, you mean in class? Oh,
I
in the
just feel like
class.
I'm in the
Oh, we talk
wrong
about it
week.
many times. We
Yeah.
talk about it many times.
No, you're
Why
not.
don't we
Don't
get
feel
one?
like that.
There's
Don't
no
feel
wrong word. There's no wrong place to start this class. You want to
We
hear
told you you'll
everything.
feel lost, but don't. Just go with
I'm
it.
like,
I told you the first
I
half
didn't
of this
hear
course
any
you're
of
going
that.
to be totally lost.
all right.
Okay, don't panic. We say everything. Those of you who have been here a while, did we say everything 10, 20 times?
Oh, good Lord, yes.
Over and over again, because you're learning a new language. And that's the only way to learn it.
1004
So,
is 1004 is what?
You've only heard this 3 or 4 times. That's why you don't know it yet. You're going to hear it more. A tri-merge and an appraisal. And that appraisal, tell them it's going to run anywhere from, tell them $1,000. It may be less than that. But what happens is these poor appraisers have to work with these management companies. And this $1,000 goes to a management company and they pay the appraiser $160, $200 for doing all the work. It's a disgrace. It's a shame that the government came through with this stupid, stupid requirement. It's called the Dodd-Frank bill. It's going to go before the Senate here in DC here within the next month. Hopefully we'll get this miserable thing overturned. It'll make all of our lives so much easier. And these poor appraisers will have a life again too. And so we have the loan application deadline, 4 or 5 days. Then the loan objection deadline, the day before closing. The day before closing. We're going to close in 44 days from acceptance. 43rd day They can still get out of this deal if something goes south on that. The interest rates shot up. And all of a sudden, they don't want to pay that much. That's the way it used to be when it was market driven, now it's not.
Hey Jim, real quick, just to confirm, 1004 is an appraisal, right?
1004 is the appraisal report, it's called the URAR, Uniform Residential Appraisal Report. One more time, write that down, guys. The 1004 is the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, URAR. The Uniform Residential Appraisal Report is the 1004. 6-page form. The 1003 is the loan application.
What's URAR again?
Uniform Residential Appraisal Report is a URAR.
So Jim, with every one of these that I've done, just on my assistant side, the loan application deadline, we're always putting completed because they've already got the application process done.
That's if you,
Does that hit a lot? Do you not see that as much?
and what Jackie just said, they put down complete, she's an unlicensed assistant, and what they do on their loan application deadline is completed. Did your people apply for a loan when they went and got their pre-qual letter? No. They haven't applied for a loan, they went and got pre-qualified, but they haven't signed anything yet. Now they gotta go in and apply. They haven't paid for their appraisal, they haven't paid for their tri-merge. So you wanna change that. You wanna change that, talk to your people and tell them to change that.
Yeah, because they don't know what house you're buying, right?
Well, that's just it, they haven't applied yet. They went and got a pre-qual letter, but again, the application deadline, they haven't signed anything, they haven't paid for anything yet. That's skin in the game, we want them in there as soon as they can. The more money they have in the game, the better. Loan objection deadline, I like it the day before closing, whatever your broker says. Buyer's credit information deadline, these next 6 lines have to do on an owner will carry, where the seller is carrying back. The seller is carrying back this loan. Put down NA on all of those. Then you go up to the appraisal. Everybody there, the appraisal. And the appraisal deadline, if it's an FHA loan or a VA loan, you never put down an appraisal deadline. Because FHA and VA do not stand behind their appraisers. I should say appraisals, but same difference, I think. Again, the appraisal deadline, you never put it down if it's an FHA or VA loan. If it's a conventional loan, of course you put down the appraisal deadline and the objection deadline. Then, we have the survey. There isn't one deal out of 40 where a lender or title company is going to order a survey, but they may do it. But even though they don't, even though it's so very rare, we still put down a survey date because we want to put it down there and then we get overridden. They decide they don't want it, but we required it. What if they need one and we don't have a date there? We have a liability issue. So you always fill that in, even though it's pretty much worthless most of the time. Get this survey done within 2 or 3 weeks. And then we have the survey objection deadline, give 1 day after that, and the resolution deadline 1 day after that. But guys, do yourself a favor, always fill in those survey dates.
Is there a different contract for or a different, like an extension of this for the ones that have well tests that have to be completed or septic tests that need to be completed? Is that included in the appraisal?
Different, you mean a different contract?
Like, yeah, because there's no lines on here that say well test completion date or septic test completion date, because those have deadlines too,
Oh,
right?
they are. Okay, there was a good question. Let's go back to page 2, and she says, when do we have these well completion deadlines and everything? That's that section 2.7 up there. 2.7 on page 2. The water right, the deeded water rights, et cetera, when do we have to get these water rights done?
Mhm.
But they're usually not going to be right in this line right here, but they're going to be on page 2 right there. And it's so rare that we deal with water rights when we're working in the city. but we can, it can happen. Continuing. And then the biggie, inspection objection deadline. Guys, if a deal's gonna fall apart, it's gonna fall apart right at that inspection. And you wanna get this inspection done within a couple of weeks. Inspection objection deadline. Not only get it done, but you're gonna be, what's gonna happen, the inspector's gonna come back with this list. And you're gonna send it over to the seller, and the listing broker's gonna sit down with the seller. And the seller's gonna say, okay, I'll do this, this, and this, I won't do that, that, and that. And that's what happens with that inspection report.
I got a question. Back to the appraisal. What if you have a contract to buy and sell that is higher than the appraisal value?
What if we have one that you, in this case, you have a property and, see, the appraisal is a great equalizer. So you're offering $350,000 for this property, and the appraisal comes in at $330,000, $20,000 low. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
You have to go to the seller and say, listen, you sold your home $20,000 higher than what it's worth. And the seller may say, heck with you, I don't care. You want to buy my property, you have to make up the difference. You can just walk away, get your money and walk away. Or he can say, yeah, okay, that's why you get an appraisal done, so he drops his value $20,000. And what happens, guys, whether you're the buyer's broker or the listing broker, or either one, or both, meet that appraiser out there and show up with comparables for them that they can use, comparables that they can use. I've had so many, the real pros that meet me out there with these comparables. Most of the time they're worthless. They're usually sales listings instead of sales, whatever, but you know what? There's that one deal out of 10 where you guys show up with what's called a pocket listing, a listing that never made it to the MLS, and you saved me on that deal. So show up and meet that appraiser. Have some control over your deals, guys. Meet that appraiser. Do your due diligence. Pull up those comparables and meet them. How about the inspector? Do you want to meet the inspector? Heck yes, you do. Ken says he's in the typical home 4 to 5 hours. Are you going to be in there for 4 hours? No, but I'll be with him for half an hour. The Real Estate Commission says never walk around with the inspector because of liability. I don't agree. Walk around with that inspector. You're not going to be with him the whole time, and you might learn something. What's that?
What liability?
Because he's showing you things that are wrong with that house, maybe, and you didn't report it, but he did. Something like that. I really, because I don't think there's any liability at all. He is covering us. He's working for the deal, isn't he? And so again, walk around with that inspector for half an hour. When I've been out with Ken, I always meet Ken, Ishmael and my stuff. Every time I've been with him, I've learned something. I'm not an inspector. I'm not a builder. I know, like say, as a broker, we know a little bit about everything. And not to be dangerous. Walk around with that appraiser. Walk around with that inspector. That appraiser's only in the home for like 20 minutes. Then he's got 4 hours of paperwork ahead of him.
Do the appraisers know what the contract is written for?
You better believe they do.
Do they?
They have to. I've got to have a copy of that contract, because there may be seller, we're going to talk about this, the seller concessions. If this home sold for $400,000 and I've got $20,000 of seller concessions, what did it really sell for? $380,000. One more time. Contract's $400,000, but there's $20,000 of seller concessions. What did it sell for? $380,000, not $400,000.
So does the appraiser look at those?
You better believe we do. You better believe, I wouldn't do an appraisal. I would not do an appraisal without that contract, because I don't have the whole story. How are we doing? Making sense? And then we have the inspection resolution deadline, property insurance objection deadline. This happened because of all the fires we had back in 2001, 2002. And what happened is that all the fires over there, there's so many of those areas you can't get insurance. If you can't get insurance, you can't get a loan. Well, this is how I handle this line. I like it. Because I can get out of this contract for any reason or no reason because of that line. So for me, when I'm buying a property for myself, I will put down that insurance objection deadline the day before closing, so that I can get out of this deal if I need to.
Where are you seeing that, Jim?
The inspection insurance objection, property, that's on line 27. Now, guys, don't do this with your people. Don't give them that power. Okay, I wish I wasn't recording right now, but I mean, do this on your own deals to protect yourself, but don't do that with your people. Okay, there's a lot of other different ways they can get out if they need to from other ways. But this insurance objection is a nice ace in the hole for you when you're buying your own properties. You didn't hear me say that, okay? And then we have the due diligence documents. These are the rental. You guys okay?
We've got the insurance objection deadline, the same as the acceptance date.
Yeah, on yours it does.
Oh, whatever you want to put down on that. And whatever. Usually you want that in the on the acceptance date, when you're working with your people, or very, very soon. So they cannot object to and get out of the deal because of something to do with you. Because you know you can get insurance around town here. You're going to be able to get insurance on that home. The due diligence documents, that would be a lease that you have because they're going to be in the home for over 3 days. Due diligence documents, very seldom does that come into play. And then you have your conditional sales deadline. They have a home to sell. How long do you want to give them to do that? And so this is the toughest part of the whole contract, these dates, getting them correct. And your employing broker will be looking over your shoulder filling all these out. And if he isn't, find another broker. Because you don't know how to fill these out, and you can make some drastic mistakes by not filling this out correctly. Why don't we go ahead and take about a 10-minute break? Let's keep rocking, guys. Let's go.
Yeah. Oh, I saw that one.
Now.
In the chip area, there was this huge thing.
Just kidding.
Look at that. Look at those lines right below those numbers there on page 3. Essentially line 86. And this explains it. If FHA or VA loan boxes are checked, the appraisal deadlines do not apply. Then it talks about the applicability of terms, the NA or MEC. Then the whole contract revolves around this section 4. Here and in the appraisal section are the only two places where you see the value of the property, what they're paying for it, or what they're offering anyway. And if you look at this section 4 down here, everybody there?
Yep.
This section 4, you got the purchase price, $117,000. You have the earnest money, $1,500 on the right. You have the loan amount, and then down here on line 9, you have the cash at closing. What that is the down payment. That's not the closing costs. And you have to be very diligent about this, guys. This guy's going to look at this, the couple's going to look at this, whatever, and say, okay, I only need to bring $2,000 to the closing. Oh, no, no. He also has to bring in the closing costs, and we have to estimate these closing costs. And to estimate closing costs, use this formula. If the loan amount, not the purchase price, but the loan amount is less than $180,000, it's going to be about 3.5%. Your closing costs. If they're going to be less than if your loan amount is less than $180,000, your closing costs are going to be about 3.5%. If your loan amount is over $180,000, it's going to be about 3%. That's how you estimate your closing costs. You have to do that with every deal, guys. You just do that in your mind. You're just estimating it.
What was it above 180 then?
180,000 above 180, it's 3%. Below 180, about 3.5%.
Thanks.
And so you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, we got a loan amount of $113,000. What is 3.5% of $113,000? Can you do that in your head?
Yeah.
What's the word? But maybe,
3,100 approximately.
yeah, about $3,800, $4,000. Say it's not gonna be 2,000, it's gonna be more like 6,000. And you tell your people that, it's gonna be about $6,000 you have to show up with. Because if you don't tell them that, and they've got 2,000 in their mind, you're gonna have a problem.
So then what is the cash at closing for, if not for closing costs? You already paid your earnest money. Is that an additional down payment?
Oh, we've got a ton of stuff, that's what the rest of this contract is all about, what we're paying for besides it. What do we have for closing costs on everything? We have all of our recording fees. We have the cost of things like the title insurance policy, the cost of the inspection, the cost of all these things. And again, your closing costs on a deal, figure it's gonna be about right around 3%. Less than 180,000 loan amount, about 3.5%. And make sure this line is deadly if you don't tell your people and explain it to them. More people lose deals because of this line right here than any other part of the contract. And then, the seller's concessions. Remember, at closing, seller will credit to the buyer, in this case, $3,000 in seller's concessions. You don't see a lot of seller's concessions anymore because it's a seller's market out there. But 4 or 5 years ago, you bet. You almost always had some type of seller concessions. And then the earnest money, in the form of a promissory note, will be payable and held by, it could be the listing broker. Many times they're going to have you make it out, and you may want to do this too, make it out to the title company who's going to be holding this escrow. Make it out to Security Title or Land Title or something who's going to be holding it. Does that make sense?
So if people need you to break down the closing costs, where are they gonna see that?
They're not going to see it. Can you break that down for me? No, I can't. Because in 3 or 4 days, you're going to go in and fill out your, what?
Your application?
Your 1003. And then within 3 business days after that, you're going to get what? What is that called? A GFE. What's that stand for?
Good faith estimate.
Good faith estimate, and also a TILA report, truth in lending report, and that's going to break down your closing costs for you. I'm just giving you a rough estimate. You're going to have the exact here very shortly, within the next couple of weeks at the latest. The GFE and the TILA, Truth in Lending Act report. Now, go to page 4. And the 4.3.1, look at that there in that second paragraph there, line 110. The alternative earnest money deadline, the deadline for delivering the earnest money, if other than at the time of tender of this contract, is as set forth in the alternative earnest money deadline. And again, you want to make this no longer than a week. All I got was a promissory note from these people. I don't even have a check. I want to make sure I get this taken care of real soon. And then the return of the earnest money. If buyer has a right to terminate and timely terminates, buyer is entitled to the return of the earnest money as provided in this contract. If this contract is terminated as set forth in section 25, 24, why don't they just put it right here? They don't. So let's go to section 25 and 24. Let's skip ahead here. And let's go to page 14. 14, and it talks about number 24. We've talked about this before, let's talk about it again. This is section 24 here. What if again, the earnest money dispute, the deal falls apart at the closing table, I'm sitting in my office. What are the 3 things I can do with this money? I can await, look at number 1, 4 lines down, on number 24, 4 lines down, kind of in the middle. I can wait for any proceedings. What are the proceedings? Mediation, arbitration, litigation. And then they tell me what to do with it. Mediation, arbitration, litigation. Number 2, guaranteed question, look at that word, interplead. You're gonna turn it over to the courts and let them decide. Or the third one, I can wait 120 days if nobody tells me what to do. I can then just give it back to the buyer, not worry about getting sued. So those are the 3 things I am able to do. And then it talks about that next section there, number 25, where termination, right to terminate. And of course, you have a right to terminate subject to certain liabilities. Some of them you can terminate for any reason or no reason. Some of them not so much. We'll be talking about those. So let's go back to the end then, to page 4. And look at this 4.1, line 117, the forms of funds. Remember, good funds is what? Money I can get my hands on immediately as a matter of right. And we, what's that? We're on 4.4 on line 117, page 4.
Line 4.
I gotta get these terms done.
You guys okay?
Yes.
Okay, now, so we have the good funds, remember? Remember, cash is not considered good funds anymore. Then we have time of payment, the available funds. All funds, including the purchase price to be paid by the buyer, must be paid before or at the closing or as otherwise agreed in writing. And buyer, next sentence, buyer represents that buyer, as of this date, does or does not have the down payment. Check that box if he does have it or doesn't have it. And that down payment is a fraction of what the closing costs are, but they want to make sure the down payment is there. 4.5.1, buyer is to pay all loan costs. And the buyer is responsible, of course, for his own funds at closing. And the buyer may select financing. What if I get approved by a lender and then I find another lender where I can get it cheaper? Can I go through that other lender? Of course I can, as long as the seller is not harmed. So the buyer holds all the marbles when it comes to getting the loan done. Does he know, do they have any clue how to get a loan? They don't know. That's why they need us. That's why they need us. And I find it real frustrating when I talk to brokers and they say, I don't need to know anything about financing, I just turn over to my lender and they handle everything. Bull. Not only do you need to be able to help your people, but how about on your own loans that you're getting for yourself? Loan limitations, you only check one of these. You check FHA, this is an FHA. This is an FHA loan. And then good faith estimate. The good faith estimate, the monthly payment, loan costs and everything. This is again a requirement of RESPA. You give a good faith estimate of the closing costs. This next part down to the bottom has to do with an owner will carry, so it's not applicable. We just Z that out. And that's the way to do it. Don't just X it out. Draw a line on the top line, line on the bottom line, and connect it. It looks so much cleaner that way. Let's go over to page 5, guys, and look at the second part. Financing, the top part up there again doesn't apply. Financing conditions and obligations. 5.1, the loan application. If buyers to pay all or part of the purchase price by obtaining one or more new loans, or if an existing loan is not to be released at closing, buyer, if required by such lender, must make an application verifiable by such lender on or before the loan application deadline. And the loan objection, the buyer is to pay all or part of it. And he has until the day before closing to cancel this contract if that loan isn't what he expected it to be. And credit information, 5.3, if an existing loan is not to be released at closing, this contract is conditional upon seller's approval of buyer's financial ability. Actually, this credit information has to do with the owner will carry, It should have been Z'd out, actually.
So 5.3 through.
5.3 all the way through to 6 should be Z'd out in actuality. Now, the appraisal, 5.3, guys, scratch all that out. And then 5.4 also, that should be Z'd out.
Information and existing one.
Yeah. And then we have appraisal provisions. The appraisal provisions, the appraisal definition, let's read this. An appraisal is an opinion of value prepared by a licensed or certified appraiser. When you start as an appraiser, you start as a registered appraiser. They're not even allowed to be in the industry. There's no entry level for appraisers. That's why they will be gone in just a few more years. Unless they get rid of that stupid Dodd-Frank thing. We'll see. And an appraisal is an opinion of value prepared by a licensed or certified appraiser, engaged on behalf of the buyer or buyer's lender to determine the property's market value. And so who determines market value? An appraiser. What determines market value? The market. Two different questions. Who determines market value? The appraiser. What determines market value? The market. And the appraisal may also set forth certain lender requirements, replacements, removals or repairs necessary on or to the property as a condition of the property to be valued at the appraised value. This home's worth $400,000, but you need to put banisters down all the stairways. You gotta repaint it. It's an FHA loan. There can be no wood showing anywhere, including the fences, unless it's, of course, just a privacy fence.
Really?
Exactly. And we're closing tomorrow, and we just saw this appraisal today. This happens, guys.
You're talking about like exterior wood.
I'm talking about any wood anyway. It's usually exterior, of course. The inside usually doesn't peel, but on the outside, yeah. It's like underneath the eaves is where you see it a lot of times. And this can really be an issue. We're closing tomorrow. What are we going to do? Well, you not only have to get it done, but then you have to get that appraiser out there to okay it. And we're closing tomorrow. It can be a real pain. So what you do is you're the broker, you're working with the buyer or the seller, you call up the other broker and you say, well, get your people. You bring out the hammer and the nails, I'll bring the drill and the beer, let's get this thing done. Let's spend a couple hours and knock this out. Don't make a big deal out of it, because it has to be done. You can argue and cry all you want to. And they say over here in another part that the buyer can say, oh, you don't need to do this. No, the buyer cannot exclude that, because the appraiser said it's worth this much if you get this stuff done. It's a condition of the appraisal.
What if you could have the appraisal redone that doesn't say it's a condition of?
If it's an FHA loan, that FHA appraisal is etched in stone for 4 months.
Whoa.
You cannot get another one. If it's a conventional loan, yeah, you can get another one, but you're closing tomorrow. You have to play the game. And that other appraiser's going to come out and do the same thing if they know what they're doing. And then we have conventional or other appraisals. Talks about what it is, notice of termination, and then have appraisal objection, appraisal resolution. And again, you sit down with the people and you say, okay, the appraisal came in lower than what the purchase price is. What are you going to do about it, Mr. Seller? I need you to drop the price of your property if you expect me to buy this property. Now, look at the bottom down here where it says FHA. Let's read this, FHA. It is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provision of this contract, the purchaser, the buyer, shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described herein or to incur any penalty by forfeiture of the earnest money deposits or otherwise unless the purchaser, the buyer, everybody following where I'm at? Top the next page here. Has been given in accordance with HUD, FHA, or VA requirements, a written settlement or a written statement issued by the Federal Housing Commission, Department of Veteran Affairs, or direct endorsement lender setting forth the appraised value of the property of not less than the purchase price, in this case, $117,000. The purchaser, the buyer, shall have the privilege and option of proceeding with the consummation of this contract without regard to the amount of the appraised valuation. In other words, they can make up the difference if they want to. And the appraised valuation is arrived at to determine the minimum mortgage the Department of Housing and Urban Development will insure. And then HUD, FHA throws the appraiser under the bus. HUD does not warrant the value nor the condition of the property. The purchaser should satisfy themselves that the price and condition of the property are acceptable. That's why you never put down a done date for the FHA or VA appraisal. Look on 6-4 down here. It says cost of appraisal. Cost of the appraisal is usually paid for, of course, by the buyer. Either party can pay for it. Everything's negotiable except for the cost of mediation, which we're going to get to in a little bit here. Look at number 7, the homeowners association. There isn't one here. Now, if there is a homeowners association, let's read this. This is very well written, and a lot of people don't realize the liabilities of being in a subdivision where there is a homeowners association. The common interest community disclosure, 7.1. The property is located within a common interest community and is subject to the declaration for the community. The owner of the property will be required to be a member of the owners association for the community and will be subject to the bylaws and rules and regulations of the association. The declaration, bylaws, and rules and regulations will impose financial obligations upon the owner of the property, including an obligation to pay assessments of the association. If the owner does not pay these assessments, the association could place a lien on the property and possibly sell it to pay the debt. The declaration, bylaws, and rules and regulations of the community may prohibit the owner from making changes to the property without an architectural review by the association or a committee of the association and the approval of the association. Purchasers of property within the common interest community should investigate the financial obligations of members of the association, and purchasers should carefully read the declaration for the community and the bylaws and rules and regulations of the association. If you get behind on your association payments, the association can foreclose on your property. In Colorado, you have a first lien, a second lien, let's say. Of course, all your tax liens are paid first in case of default. Then, of course, your first lien is paid, your second mortgage. But you know what comes right after taxes? Homeowners association liens. They're ahead of any other bank lien or anything else you have on your property.
What?
They're ahead of everything except taxes.
This is 7.1.
That was in 7.1, yes. And then 7.2, the owner association documents consist of the following. I'm in 7.2.1 on line 259. All owner association declaration, articles of incorporation, bylaws, articles of organization, operating agreements, rules and regulations, party wall agreements, minutes of the most recent homeowners association meetings. It's up to the seller to provide these to the buyer if there's a homeowners association.
What a mess. Why would anybody want to live in one of these?
So if you want to live in there, you have to go
Oh, yeah.
buy it. You know,
Half
and
places are, all the
So-
new places have HOAs.
yeah.
And so I guess in my subdivision, because I hate paying my homeowners association fees, but because they just keep going up. But anyways, after 10 years, I guess the homeowner association has been established. Can you get rid of the homeowners association? I hear this, but I don't know if it's
Let's
true.
talk about this, guys. Who doesn't like their association? You know what? You are the association. If you don't like it, get involved. Second of all, almost all homeowners associations are non-profit. They can't make a profit. So like John just said, my fees just keep going up and up. It's probably nonprofit. These are legitimate expenses they have. Very possibly are. Can you get rid of your association? If there aren't any community property, in other words, like a condominium, of course, you have to have one because essentially everybody in there owns all of the exterior walls and the land and the swimming pool and everything. But you might have an association where there's no common interest. In that case, you can get rid of your association. You bet you can.
They get away with that with like having a 10-by-10 playground with a seesaw.
Yeah, that's all
Well,
we
you
have.
are, okay, guys, the statement was they can do this. You are they. Okay, you are the association. Get involved. We'll be talking about more and more about the association as we're going through this too.
And they have a budget, and you should be able to look at that budget line by line and see exactly what's being paid.
Yeah, I mean, most of it is, like, most of what they're paying for is like putting a garden around the sign. It's crazy. But
Yeah.
our homeowners association, like, even if you go to the meetings, they'll even emphasize like where it's owned or ran by this law firm. You know, so we have like little power in the homeowners association as
No,
homeowners.
no, the association is always owned by the people who live there. Always, always. But you might pay a management company to be managing it. But you have a lot to say about it. You better believe you do. You own that association.
So the association is just paying exorbitant fees to probably somebody who lives there's law firm.
Well, we don't, I mean, we've been fighting the same issues for like 2 years, and it's still like, and they're common issues throughout the neighborhood, because they're, you know, in Denver, they're pushing everybody back by the airport, so like they're building like these low-income houses, and it's like bringing in a bunch of chaos, so,
Well,
yeah, it's no.
Okay, we can talk about association for the next 2 hours. Let's keep moving on. We talk about associations very heavily later on in the Colorado
Is
part
that
of
on
the
the
course.
test?
Oh, there's a whole lot about associations on the test. You better believe it. It's a big part of our industry. Oh, yeah. And we'll talk about it in greater detail, too. You're going to have a completely different opinion of your association when we get through. You really will, John. So. Now, let's keep going here, guys. Down in 7.3, association documents to the buyer and the sellers to provide these association documents. Now, generally speaking, they run about $50 usually. But I know of one subdivision in Denver where it costs $2,100 to get these. I know another one that's $1,500
Running some
to get these stupid association fees to give them to the buyer. Yeah. So, but mostly they're usually $50, and usually the title company will get them for you. But it's up to the seller to provide these to the buyer, these association documents. And it's conditional at 7.4 upon the buyer's review. Let's go to the next page, page 7, guys. Look at number 8 here. The title insurance, the record title and off-record title. Look at this 8.1. The seller, if the seller selects the title insurance company. Now typically the seller selects it. The Real Estate Commission came out last year and said that we cannot select the title company. But guys, the seller has no clue title even exists. He doesn't know who to order it from or whatever. And so what we do is we work with the seller to pick out the right title company is the best way to put it. So we'll work with the seller to pick out the title company. You're going to have your favorite title company that you're going to be using as a broker, and that's your go-to people. And as somebody, they're a proven commodity for you, and you know they can handle it. But essentially the seller selects it, or the buyer can select it. It used to be whoever selected it paid for it, but not anymore. The buyer can select it and the seller can pay for it, but it doesn't say so on the contract.
Would that be something you could add in?
What, the buyer is selecting it and no, you can just put it in there anywhere in the additional provisions. Buyer's picking the title company, but the seller's paying for it. Remember, there's 2 title policies. There's the owner's policy or seller's policy. That's the expensive one. Say it costs $1,500, whatever. Then we have the mortgagee's policy, the lender's policy. That's just a spin-off of that. When we get to closings, we talk about that in much greater detail. And then we have the owner, going down to line 295, the owner's extended coverage. This is where the seller will pay extra to have these things covered also. They're the standard exceptions. The title insurance policy does not include these things unless you pay extra for them. It usually runs, $60 to $100. It's not that expensive, but it covers these other items. Always, always require these to be covered, and whoever, the seller pays for it, either party can pay for it. They can both split it if you want to down here. Again, these are the owner's extended coverage, the standard exceptions to a policy.
But you said how much extra is that? 50, 60 bucks?
Anywhere 40 to 100 bucks to insure over the standard exceptions
So
is what it's
pretty-
called.
Pretty worth it then?
Oh, you always want to get it, sure. And then we have the title documents consist of the, what is this title? We talk about title all the time. What is this title documents all about? Let's read this on 8.1.4. Title documents consist of the following: copies of any plats, declarations, covenants, conditions, restrictions burdening the property, copies of any other documents, or if illegible, summaries of such documents listed in the schedule of exceptions in the title commitment furnished by the buyer, which are the title documents. It doesn't sound like much, but that's huge. That will prove that you have a marketable piece of property that you're buying. And then 8.1.5, copies of title documents. Buyer must receive on or before record title deadline copies of all title documents. And this requirement pertains only to documents as shown of record in the office of the clerk and recorder in the county where the property is located. And the cost of furnishing copies of the document required in this section will be at the expense of the party or parties obligated to pay for the title insurance policy. Existing abstracts. Sometimes there's some old abstracts. Those of you who've had this part, what are the two words that tell us we're working with an abstract?
History and chain.
Very good. History of title or chain of title. If you've been listening to my glossary, you should have had that, guys. And then we have the record title buyer has the right to review or object to the abstracted title. Maybe it was, like I say, we haven't used those for 40, 50 years. But there was a time when that's all we used. If there's one around, we have to provide it. Then we have off-record title, things that are not a matter of the public record. And the title companies will even insure those things. Pretty cool. Let's read this. Seller must deliver to the buyer on or before off-record title deadline true copies of all existing surveys in seller's possession pertaining to the property, and must disclose to the buyer all easements, liens, including without limitation government improvements, improved but not yet installed, or other title matters, including without limitation rights of first refusal. You talked about that where they have a home to sell or something, right? Let's jump down to 8.4. The rights to object to the title. And if the buyer doesn't like this title, he can get out of this contract for any reason or no reason pertaining to that title. That's how important it is. He has to assure themselves that they have marketable title. And it's up to the seller to provide marketable or merchantable title. And title objection and resolution. Again, we have the title resolution deadline. That's one of those dates in that first part that we started with. And the title objection right to terminate. Well, look at this special taxing district. Special taxing district. Remember the story that we talked about when North Glen first became a city? And what happened is the city's sewer and water system didn't work. So they not only had to rebuild it, but they had to purchase water from Westminster and Thornton. And it wasn't unusual for your water bill to be much higher than your house payment. You got it straightened out since then. Anybody here live in North Glen?
No, but I remember.
You remember
Yeah,
back then?
Odell Berry. He was the mayor of North Bend at the
He
time.
was Odell Berry, you're right.
And it caused, their water bills back when everybody was paying about $25 was over $300.
Mhm. Oh yeah, $300 for your water bill. They got it squared away now, but it was a heck of a mess. You still see these. Where you see them now are mainly, I shouldn't just zero in, but Weld County, Douglas County, where they have a central well for the whole subdivision, and that well's going dry. What are they gonna do? So again, this comes into play. And if it's a special taxing district, you can find out the morning of closing, it's a special taxing district, and get out of that contract immediately, because you didn't know it was a special taxing district till that morning. There was a subdivision in South Douglas County, North Douglas County, I should say. This is 30 years ago, whenever it was. I remember I did an appraisal in there, and I went through this subdivision. Every home was up for sale. I'm going, what the heck is going on? That wasn't my normal appraisal area. And they had put a lien on these properties because the sewer and water didn't work. They had to rebuild it, everything. There was a lien on every one of those properties for the sewer and water that was higher than what the property was worth.
Oh,
And every property was for sale and no takers, no takers. The property was worthless. They did get it straightened out. But you'll see these special taxing districts, they're not that unusual.
Did you know, up until 3 months ago, special taxing districts didn't have to notify anybody they annexed into it?
Who told you that?
In Adams County, they just had a court settlement last week. Because Todd Creek tried to annex me and my two neighbors that are right on either side, because we're the only ones that don't live in their cul-de-sac. They basically annexed us and we were never notified. Luckily,
Is that right? Huh.
luckily, my neighbor was at the court office and the lady next to him was turning in the paperwork. And he was like, I was never notified of this. And then he got right on the horn and it went all the way to the federal level and they just settled
Really?
it. So now they have to at least send you a postcard that says you're being annexed.
Isn't that some, you think that'd be the least they can do?
Right?
Right?
You know, and a lot of times, you know, you're in the county and the city annexes you. So you're not annexed from city to city, okay? It's usually county and city is how they do it. And you have to do it sometimes, especially as a developer. I run into this where the property's in a county and the utilities aren't into it yet. Well, counties don't run utilities. I've got to go petition Thornton or Brighton or whatever and petition them to annex that subdivision that I'm in that I want to develop so that I'll have the utilities into it. Because the county won't do it. Only cities will put in the utilities. You know, it's just little things like this that you've got to know about when you're developing out there. So anyway, these special taxing districts, guys, can really just, they can ruin your life if you get in there and you don't know about them. We talked about the right of first refusal. We have title advisory. Look at 871 down here. Oil, gas, water, and mineral disclosure. The surface estate of the property may be owned separately from the underlying mineral estate. And it is. I mean, who owns the mineral rights? The government owns 70%, and the railroads own the other 30% for all intents and purposes. So the surface estate of the property may be owned separately from the underlying mineral estate. And transfer of the surface estate may not necessarily include transfer of the mineral estate or water rights. Third parties may own or lease interests in oil, gas, other minerals, geothermal energy, or water on or under the surface of the property, which interests may give them rights to enter and use the surface of the property to access the mineral estate, oil, gas, or water. If they own your mineral rights, they have a right of procurement. They can come in there and start drilling on your property anytime they want to, with or without your permission. And surface use agreement, the use of the surface estate of the property to access the oil, gas, or minerals may be governed by a surface use agreement. Make sure if you're on an acreage property that you know what you're getting into. let's look at, the next page here, page 9, top of the page. And again, it talks about, again, the mineral rights, oil rights, all of these things that come into play. 873 on top of the page. Oil and gas activity. Oil and gas activity that may occur on or adjacent to the property may include, but is not limited to, surveying, drilling, well completion, operations, storage, oil and gas, or production facilities, producing wells, and reworking of current wells, and gas gathering and processing facilities. Then there's additional information. Buyers encouraged to seek additional information regarding oil and gas activity on or adjacent to the property, including drilling permit applications. This information may be available from the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And title insurance exclusions. Matters set forth in this section and others may be accepted, excluded from, or not covered by the owner's title insurance policy. And consult an attorney. Buyers advised to timely consult legal counsel. Remember, we have to advise everybody that they consult an attorney and also that they have a right to examine the title. That's already part of this contract, so we don't have to advise it anymore. It's already part of the contract. They put that in there for us. And then we have the new what the heck's an ILC?
Improvement locations.
Improvement Location Certificate, a certificate showing us the location of the improvements. It's not a survey. ILCs run a couple $100, where surveys run thousands. And you have an ILC or a survey. We always require these to be done. We'll let the lender or title company override us. But we put down the dates, remember that we have to get it done. And look at this 911. Ordering a new ILC or survey, the buyer will order the new ILC or survey, or the buyer's lender or the buyer's title company, either one, or the lender's title company. And payment of the new ILC is always done by the buyer. I shouldn't say always, everything's negotiable. It's typically done by the buyer. The buyer pays for the survey, the buyer pays for the appraisal, the buyer pays for the inspection. The owner typically pays for the title insurance. And then we have 913, delivery of the new ILC or survey. Buyer and seller, the insurer of the title commitment, or the provider of the title. And the brokers, lenders, whatever you want to put in there. Brokers, lenders will get a copy of it. And 914, their certificate of new ILC or new survey will be certified by the surveyor to all those who are to receive the new ILC or new survey. And the buyer's right to waive or change the new ILC or survey selections. Buyer may select a new ILC or a new survey differently. If they don't like the results of what they got, they can order another survey if they want to. Same with an appraisal. If it's a conventional loan, not FHA, VA, they can order another one also, but not FHA. It's etched in stone for 4 months. And then you have a notice to terminate. If you want to, you have a termination letter. It's an approved form by the Division of Real Estate.
Jim, on an FHA, let's say you have a buyer, they do the survey, etched in stone for 4 months, it falls apart. Another FHA buyer comes along, they use that other survey, so they don't have to repay for a survey? Or do they have to buy the survey now?
Oh, no, they can use them to get another survey, sure.
So, but it's only for that transaction, it's less than 4 months?
No, you're talking about an appraisal for 4 months, not the survey.
Okay,
Yeah, the
sorry.
survey, you can keep ordering them over and over again, every day if you want to. But that appraisal, that is etched in stone, it's an FHA.
Okay.
That's why a lot of brokers now, I see it in the MLS where they're saying we'll only accept conventional contracts now. Because a lot of these appraisals are coming in short
Because of the market?
because of the market. And they're saying, well, we want a conventional loan, so we can just order another conventional appraisal.
Huh.
And then you find new comps and get the appraiser to do another one. FHA, you can't. Okay, let's jump down to number 10 down here, property disclosure, inspections, indemnity, insurability, due diligence, buyer disclosure, source of water, and the seller's property disclosure. Everybody got that down there? On or before seller's properties, remember this is not mandatory. Let's read this. On or before seller's property disclosure deadline, seller agrees to deliver to the buyer the most recent version of the applicable Colorado Real Estate Commission seller's property disclosure form, completed to seller, by seller to seller's actual knowledge, current as of the date of this contract.
So if that's in here, then they have to do it.
Does that sound like it's voluntary?
No.
It sure doesn't, does it? The buyer expects to see one, the seller expects to fill one out. Don't play games with this seller's disclosure. Make sure they get it filled out, guys. But what if it's it's not mandatory, no. It's voluntary, but again, guys, I'm not gonna buy a property unless I see that seller's disclosure. With very few exceptions. If he's not filling out his disclosure, what else is he hiding in this property? You know? This is really, really important. You gotta know what you're getting into. But it is not a required form, but everybody expects to see it in a deal. I said, I closed my first deal without one a few months ago, but I had Ken the inspector. So I trusted Ken enough where he was anything weird, he would have found it. And disclosure of latent, what does latent mean?
Late.
Hidden. Hidden defects. We have to disclose all known hidden defects, things that aren't obvious. We have to disclose everything that's ever been fixed, even if it was done before we bought the property. And then the inspection. Down there on 10-3, inspection, unless otherwise provided in this contract, buyer acting in good faith has the right to have the inspection by one or more third parties, personally or both, of the property and inclusions. And the buyer, of course, typically pays for the inspection also. Let's go to the next page. Look at that line 449, notice to terminate. Notify the seller in writing that this contract is terminated. You have to have a termination letter. Inspection objections. We have those dates to object to the inspection. Make sure everything's done the way it should be done. We have damage, liens, and indemnity, this 10.4. Buyer, except as otherwise provided in this contract or other written agreement between the parties, is responsible for payment for all inspections, tests, surveys, engineering reports, or other reports performed at buyer's request, and must pay for any damage that occurs to the property. If I order something to be done and there's damage to the property, I'm liable for it. How about insurability? 10.5, buyer has a right to review and object to the availability, terms, and conditions of and premiums for property insurance. And buyer has a right to terminate on or before property insurance objection deadline based on any unsatisfactory provision of the property in buyer's sole subjective discretion. That's the one I make right the day before closing, so I can get out of this contract anytime I want to at my sole subjective discretion, any reason or no reason. I don't need a reason to do it. And then due diligence. Due diligence documents. These are the ones if you have to have a lease on the property because they're going to be in there over 3 days. That's the typical due diligence. That's why the Real Estate Commission put it in here. Let's continue and on page on number 10-7, conditional upon the sale of the property. You might have a home to sell. That information continues right there. This 10.8, source of potable or drinkable water. And every seller in the state now has to fill out this potable or potable water. And saying that I'm getting my water from Denver and the possibility of continued availability is very good, is what they're saying. And it is something, because again, it's parts of Douglas and Weld County. They have these central wells that are going dry. It's a huge issue. Look on page, look at the next page, 10.9, carbon monoxide alarms. What about carbon monoxide alarms? They have to be, well, within 15 feet of all bedrooms, upstairs or downstairs. That's the main thing about carbon monoxide alarms. Everybody got that? 15 feet, remember that. Remember it for real life.
So it's not required though to have a certain amount in each house, as long as the one, like if you have one, but it's bedroom, bedroom, bedroom,
Yeah.
living room, like, that's okay then.
Like on a two-story, you got 4 bedrooms on the upper level, and there's one carbon monoxide can serve all 4 of those bedrooms as long as they're within 15 feet.
Now, is the door within 15 feet or the center of the room? I'm just trying to figure it out.
I know, whatever you think is right. Within 15 feet of the bedroom, okay?
Whatever helps it smell better.
Whatever makes you, whatever
Whatever
rings
helps you sleep at night.
your bell, yeah.
The door, I guess.
And then we have lead-based paint, good old lead-based paint. Let's read this, guys. It's different than in the listing contract. Let's read this. The lead-based paint. Unless exempt, if the improvements on the property include 1 or more residential dwellings for which a building permit. In Colorado, we're the only state where it's a building permit issued before January 1st, 1978. In every other state, it's built before then. And that's the same date that asbestos was banned. Well, we don't need an asbestos disclosure, we do need a lead-based paint disclosure. This contract is void unless a completed lead-based paint disclosure form is signed by the seller, the required real estate licensee and buyer, and seller receives the completed and fully executed form prior to the time when this contract is signed by all parties. Remember we talked about that? What are the 4 ways a contract may be void? One is signing the contract before the lead-based paint disclosure. There it is in writing. What are the other 3?
Duress?
Duress is voidable.
It's legally insane by court.
Insane by a court, like criminally insane. One more time. Again, signing the contract before the lead-based paint disclosure. Insane by a court.
Illegal purpose.
Illegal purpose. And a verbal contract for real property through the statute of frauds is void. Let's do them again. A verbal contract through the statute of frauds is void, makes that contract void. Insane by a court makes it void. Illegal purpose makes it void. Signing the contract before the lead-based paint disclosure voids that contract. Doing okay? Now, and keep reading here, this contract, unless it completed, and then it says the buyer acknowledges timely receipt of the completed lead-based paint disclosure form, signed by the seller and the real estate licensees. We have to sign this lead-based paint too, as brokers. Both brokers do. Methamphetamine disclosure, one of the strangest laws on the books. Let's read this. If seller knows that methamphetamine was ever manufactured, processed, cooked, disposed of, used, or stored on the property, seller is required to disclose it. I like that. It only makes sense. But no disclosure is required if the property was remediated in accordance with the statute. It was remediated by a certified hygienist. It goes off of the city records. There's no evidence it was ever a meth lab. Is that the craziest law you ever heard? We have no disclosure requirements, nothing. And almost every house that they have tested after they've had this remediated, and usually the cost starts at about $14,000. It goes up from there. They've tested it and they found meth in that house, even after it's been remediated. And you want to check your house at home? Go out and get some spray starch that you use for your laundry. That's a base where meth is an acid, and spray your walls. If it changes color, there's a good chance there's meth. There was a meth lab in that house.
What?
Yeah.
So,
Sometimes
so you mean Stay Flow?
Stay flow, whatever it's
Just
called.
Spray the walls.
Just spray it on the wall, see if it changes color. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, you might not.
I was gonna say, why would you
want to
wanna do
know.
that?
You don't wanna know, yeah.
Go through your whole house
I
and
mean,
start.
is that a health violation?
Huge health fire, you better believe it. Some of this meth, guys, this meth is made with solid poison. I mean, it's just poison after poison. I'm telling you more than I know.
What color should we be looking for?
You'll turn red usually, turn red. But anyway, I was listening to this, there was this one guy from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, and he was saying that they're having a heck of a time with these hotels. Because people go into these hotels and start cooking all this meth, and then they leave, and the motel has no duty to clean it up, and they have no duty to report it. Isn't that something? What a stupid law. And this guy says that he has seen this so much in so many hotels, he won't even stay in a hotel anymore. And I said, well, that's too much information. You know, sometimes you have to stay in a hotel. But yeah, this meth thing is an issue that we have to be aware of. They say there's not as many of them there used to be because it's so much cheaper to do it in Mexico, and it's coming up from Mexico so much cheaper. Again, I'm telling you more than I know, but anyway. Then, look at this number 12. Closing docs, instructions and closing documents and closing instructions. The seller and the buyer will cooperate with the closing company to enable the closing company to prepare and deliver documents required for closing. And yet, it says right in our manual that closing companies don't prepare our documents. You have to be licensed to prepare documents. They just get all the stuff we give them and they help us. You remember that word I told you yesterday? What's that S word? Scrivener? So you work as a scrivener. But here it says that they do prepare them. No, they don't. They merely act as a scrivener for us. Then we have closing instructions. Colorado Real Estate Commission closing instructions are typically not executed with our contract. The listing broker is the one who typically fills out closing instructions. Remember yesterday I told you closing instructions, what's that word? They do what? Engage the closing entity. Guys, you remember that? They engage the closing entity. It used to be we had our contracts, we threw it at the title company and said, see you in 30 days. Not now. We have these closing instructions that give them directions how to get this done for us. Look at 12.3 here, closings. Who sets the closing and everything? Typically the listing broker does. Unless they're incompetent, then you do it as the buyer's broker. And that will help, that will happen. And there's nothing worse than an incompetent broker who thinks they're competent. Then you've got some problems. Then you have disclosure of settlement costs. Buyer and seller acknowledges that costs, quality, and extent of service vary between different settlement services. I'm not going to I'm going to order the title policy, I'm going to order the inspection, and I don't order it from the cheapest person out there. I ordered from the best. I just want to let you know that. We're talking pennies, really. And I just tell my people that.
Which is your favorite closing company?
Pardon me?
Which is your favorite?
My favorite closing company, I don't know, I might give you a different answer tomorrow. Really, because the ones out there, they're almost all of them are very good. I've had very, very few bad experiences with title companies, and they're wonderful. They're just a delight to work with because they're so professional. And whenever you always go to a closing, because title companies have the best cookies on earth. I don't know where they get them from, but they all get them from the same place, and they're always warm. Last closing I had, they didn't have cookies.
What?
And I told them, I said, get those, and by the time the closing was done, they had cookies.
It was Costco, they just nuked it in the microwave.
That's right, that's right.
That's right, Mark. Said they called you and you faked them for them.
He said, well, I'll bring them, heck yes. You gotta have cookies at a closing. They kinda go together, you know?
What are your favorite cookies? Peanut butter, sugar, macadamia.
Edible. It's gonna be nice. Edible. Let's go to number 13, guys. Transfer of title. Transfer of title is subject to tender of payment at closing as required herein and compliance by the buyer with other terms and provisions hereon. Sellers must exercise and deliver a good and sufficient, and this is the type of deed. When we're buying a property, we always want to get what?
General warranty.
General warranty deed. When we're selling a property, we always want to give a special warranty deed. So in this case, we want a general warranty deed. Now, there might be a reason where in the MLS, what if they say it's a bargain and sale deed? Why would that happen? Why would you have a bargain and sale deed, guys? Does that ring a bell? It's coming out of a probate action. Because the deceased died intestate, okay, and didn't have heirs. It was a bargain and sale. It was, again, not a bargain, a personal representative's deed. We talked about, remember the other day when we talked about this? I know it was so much the other day. Let's run through that again.
So testate.
What type, testate or intestate? Testate means you die with a will, intestate without a will. So what type of deed brings a property out of a probate action when the deceased died intestate, without a will? A personal representative's deed. Personal representative's deed. What type of deed brings a property out of a probate action when the deceased died testate, with a will? Within the will, he appointed what?
An executor.
An executor to carry out the provisions. So the type of will that brings a property out of a probate action when the deceased died testate is an executor's deed. Executor's deed. So it might be an executor's deed, might be a personal representative's deed, and you've got to know what that means. And you're going to be pretty cool to know that, because most brokers have no clue.
We're pretty cool, period.
You are. You are. Okay.
There's a man in a suit coat staring at me. Do you have a presenter today?
Yes, you do.
Tested
I believe he's here.
Yeah.
Executors. Tested.
Okay, let's keep going here, guys. Let's keep going here about number
Jimmy, I'm sorry.
13.1.
Intestate.
What intestate means without a will, testate means with a
what
will.
kind of-
A will
what
means
kind of-
testament, guys.
What kind of deed for intestate?
Oh, what type of deed brings a property out of a probate action when the deceased died intestate is personal representative's deed. What type of deed brings a property out of a probate action when the deceased died testate is an executor's deed. Those are just fancy names for quitclaim deeds. Okay. You think, guys, you should be proud you know this. Very few brokers know this stuff, guys. And I'll tell you what, you'll be out there in the real world, and so many brokers out there you'll be in these meetings. I love it when brokers call me up and say, who's this, I don't know, who's this Montana gal? She's in there and I'm sitting there giving my classes and the students are asking her questions instead of me. I go, cool. I love it, I love it. And this happens, guys. You get a reputation coming to this school that you know your stuff when you leave it. So, but again, there's a price to pay. You know, you learn a lot more than the typical student in the other schools. Let's keep going. Let's see what else. So let's jump down to payment of encumbrances. What's the definition of an encumbrance? I'll start you out. Anything that limits our use, title, interest, or value. Anything that limits our use, title, interest, or value. Okay, we're on the top of page 12. Let's go ahead and break and see you in a bit. Look out there. That's why I plugged that thing in down below.
Yeah, I know what's that. Yeah.
Are we just finishing contracts today?
We're gonna, no, we gotta keep going. Oh, way beyond that.
Okay.
Okay, let's keep going, guys. We are on page 12, top of the page, talking about closings. Closing costs, closing fees, association fees, et cetera, et cetera. Look at 15.1, top of the page there. Buyer and seller must pay in good funds their respective closing costs and all other items required. And all other items required to be paid at closing.
Except, there is an exception?
If they agree on it.
Except as otherwise provided here in, hold on, this isn't working quite right. Guys, here we are. I think we got it squared away. Let's do it.
All right.
Okay, now we're again on top of page 13. Looking at computation, wait a second. No, we're not. We're on top of page 12. We're talking about closing costs, closing fees, and how these are all split out. Hello, guys. Come on.
Hey, hey.
Come on.
Hey.
Come on. All that side noise gets picked up. I am recording.
That one too. That one too.
Now, this is on this number 15 up here is how everything is being split up. All the closing costs. We have our closing service fee. We have this lady here who's closing our deals for us. How do we pay her? Typically, the buyer and seller split those costs. That's the closing service fee. The status letter, if there is one. Just check half and half for that. We have things like local transfer tax. There is no transfer tax. So put down none. Private transfer fee. There is no private transfer fee. Put down none. Like in New York, anything you sell has a 3.75% transfer fee on it. That's more than brokers make.
Will you please say real quick what we're 12?
We're on top of page 12 where we're talking about splitting up all of these costs.
Got it.
And there's very few of them that apply to Denver. Like if you go to Breckenridge, everything is, when you sell a property, the seller pays a $5,000 transfer fee in Breckenridge, as an example. You'll see these in recreational areas. And then we have water transfer fee. You'll always have a water transfer fee unless you're working with a well. And that water transfer fee, put down 350 bucks. It's never going to be above 350. So if you put down 350 on line 570, you'll be safe. And that's for the water district. And the seller pays for that transfer fee. Either party can, but typically the seller pays for it. And then sales and use tax, again, if there is any, the buyer would pay for it, but there isn't any in this case. We have prorations. Remember in closings, some of you have taken closings, we always use last year's taxes. I don't. I use the most recent mill levy. It's going to be more accurate. So on 16.1, check that second one, most recent mill levy. Then we have rents, based on actual rents, if there are any rents or whatever. Very seldom will you be dealing with rents. But who's handling the rents? Who's receiving the rents of the people who are still in there if it's being rented? Association assessments, again, there isn't any on this property. So jump down to 17, we have possession. Possession of this property will be delivered to the buyer on possession date. At possession time, subject to whatever leases are on there. And this is real important. This is one of the most important sentences on the whole deal here. If seller, after closing, fails to deliver possession as specified, seller will be subject to eviction and will be additionally liable to buyer for payments of, and I always put at least $500 a day. I had a deal I closed a couple years ago, guys, where we closed on a Friday. We were gonna close on a Friday. The seller had till Monday to get out. And she called us on like Wednesday, like 2 days before closing, and said, I can't be out of my house by Monday. I need another month.
Sure!
And my buyer was just freaking. And I said, why are you freaking? She's gonna be paying $500 a day. Go stay at the Waldorf. You know? She was out of there by Monday.
I bet she was.
You better believe it. So you don't want to put down $50 there, guys. You want to make it significant. Reasonable, but significant. $500 would definitely hold up in court. And then buyer represents that buyer will occupy the property as our primary residence. Remember, if you're an investor, you have to state that you are not going to occupy that property. And this box down there, if this box is checked, buyer and seller agree to execute a post-closing occupancy agreement. That's the one we talked about, where they're going to be in there beyond that 3 days. Top of the next page, number 13. This we were talking about, computation of periods of days. Are we going to count holidays, if something should fall on a holiday? And what you want to have your calendar in front of you so that you don't have a closing on a Sunday or something like that. You want to be careful. That's careless, doing something like that. You just have to change it. But again, just put down computation period days. I always check will, whatever your broker wants you to do, but I always check will be counted if it's a holiday. And causes of loss, insurance, damage to inclusions and services. This is important. This paragraph, in most states, guys, if something happens to that property between contract and when you move in, say the house burns down, the buyer is liable. The buyer is liable. You hear what I just said? Yeah. Isn't that something? Not in Colorado. In Colorado, if the damage is 10% or less, the seller has to fix it before closing. If it's over 10%, it's either got to be fixed before closing, or the seller's got to make sure the insurance company's on top of it to take care of it. Or the buyer can walk away. Either way. So the buyer's totally protected in Colorado when it comes to damage to that house. Not so in most other states.
How can the buyer be responsible if they haven't closed on the house yet?
Hasn't even moved into it yet. They can't watch it day and night. And that happens. The house burns down and you're liable for it. You got to pay for it. You know, there's these liberal states out there, guys. Colorado's not quite there. We're heading that direction. We'll see. Let's go damage, inclusions, and services. Here we are, 19.2, guys. Let's read this. Inclusions and services. Should any inclusion or service, including utilities and communication services, systems, components, fixtures of the property, whatever, fail to be damaged between this date of this contract and closing or possession, whichever is earlier, then seller is liable for the repair or replacement of such inclusions or services with a unit of, nobody has ever caught this. It's been like this for 40 years, and nobody has ever caught this. And it says, again, of such inclusions or services with a unit of similar size, age, and quality. So between now and closing, the dishwasher breaks down. The seller has to replace it with another dishwasher that isn't working.
That isn't
Yeah.
working?
But that's,
Similar size, age, and quality. Nobody's ever caught that. Is that insane? Nobody has ever caught that.
Now, is it against our rights to say to the sellers, so I know that dishwasher has broke down, but...
Of course. You're going to work that out.
We should probably shut up and not say that.
You'll work it out. Because nobody's caught that. The seller and you won't catch it. Your people won't catch it. I caught it a few years ago. Anyway,
Did you tell?
I'm not going to tell anybody. Let it just go on. How about condemnation? If there's any condemnation, where would that come into play?
Foundation homes?
No. Eminent domain. What is eminent domain?
The taking.
Don't, the government or public
Taking.
taking of
For the
public,
Private,
Private
don't
property.
read it, private property, private
public
property
gain.
for the public good with just compensation by means of condemnation. That's where condemnation would come into play. And then walkthrough and verification of condition. Guys, you're gonna have your walkthrough a couple days before closing. Get there ahead of your people. Walk through that home and see if there's anything that may be an issue. And if there is, head them off, reset the closing, whatever. Don't ever show up at a walkthrough at the same time as your people. Do yourself a favor and get there 10, 15 minutes early. Smart move to do that. And recommendation of legal and tax counsel. There we go. We have to redo, remember Conway Bogue says we have to recommend that? There it is. Time is of the essence. That means these dates mean something. If we miss a date, that's the end of the contract. The contract is invalid or void. And if buyer is in default, let's look at top of the next page. What should happen? And it's 21-121, specific performance. I don't check this box. I don't check this box. It says seller may elect to treat this contract in all earnest money. This is if the buyer, a few days before closing, decides he doesn't want it or whatever. The seller can force him to buy the property. I don't give the seller that power. I don't let him have that power. I don't want this ending up in court. So I just let the second one happen, liquidated damages. If my buyer flakes out, he loses his deposit. Liquidated damages, that's the only remedy for default. The seller cannot force him to buy the property. Everybody understand what I just said? Now the buyer always can do that. The buyer holds all the marbles. He can force the seller to sell, or he can take his money and go home. The buyer always has all the marbles. The seller, only if you give it to them. Then we have legal fees, costs and expenses. Anything to the contrary, here and notwithstanding in the event of any arbitration or litigation. Remember, we start with mediation, arbitration, litigation. In mediation, we don't have attorney's fees. In arbitration and litigation, we do have attorney's fees. How are those handled? It says, in the event of any arbitration or litigation related to this contract, prior to or after closing, the arbitrator or court must award to the prevailing party all reasonable costs and expenses, including attorney's fees, legal fees, etc. The prevailing party is awarded attorney's fees. It's the opposite of what it sounds like. The winning party does not have to pay attorney's fees. The winning party does not have to pay attorneys. They are awarded attorney's fees. You will see that question. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. And then we have mediation. There's 4 things we need to know about mediation. If a dispute arises, this is identical to the paragraph in the listing contract, by the way. Let's read this.
Where are you at, Jim? Sorry.
I'm on mediation, section 23, line 675. Everybody there? If a dispute arises relating to this contract, whether prior to or after closing, and is not resolved, the parties must first proceed in good faith to mediation. Mediation is a process in which the parties meet with an impartial person who helps to resolve the dispute informally and confidentially. Mediation number 1 is for a contract dispute. Number 1 is for a contract dispute. Number 2, mediators cannot impose binding decisions. Before any mediation settlement is binding, the parties to the agreement to the dispute must agree to the settlement in writing. So again, the decision is not binding unless the parties agree that it's binding. Mediation is for a contract dispute. The decision is not binding unless the parties agree.
Mediation is just a third party that helps them talk through.
Yeah, usually there's a mediator. It could be an attorney. There's mediation companies. And they just go from room to room and they're, batting things back and forth. And the parties will jointly appoint an acceptable mediator and will share equally in the cost of such mediation. The cost of mediation is split 50-50. That's the only thing in our industry that's not negotiable, is the cost of mediation. You're going to see several questions on mediation on the exam, guys. They're easy if you just remember these 4 things. Mediation is for a contract dispute. The decision is not binding unless the parties agree. You split the cost 50-50. And the last issue, nothing in this section prohibits either party from filing a lawsuit and recording a lis pendens on the property before or after the date. Oh, excuse me, I missed a sentence. The obligation to mediate unless otherwise agreed will terminate if the entire dispute is not resolved within 30 days. You have 30 days to do it. It's for a contract dispute. It's not binding unless the parties agree. You split the cost 50-50. It's not negotiable, and you have 30 days to do it. If it doesn't happen, you go to arbitration, and then litigation to court. You have your earnest money dispute. We talked about that earlier. The 3 things that we can do if the deal falls apart: I can await for the proceedings, I can interplead to the courts, or wait 120 days. Then just give it back to the buyer. Look on page 26, on number 26 I should say, number 26. This is the entire agreement. This is called the parole evidence rule, P-A-R-O-L, evidence rule. P-A-R-O-L, parole means word or speech, or oral, word or speech. It means if it didn't make it into, if we had any verbal agreements that we made, or promises, if they didn't make it to this contract, they never existed to begin with. This is the entire agreement, the parole evidence rule. And then, top of the next page, we've got the notice of delivery and choice of law, physical delivery and notices. Any document or notice to the buyer or seller must be in writing except as provided in this section, and is effective when physically received by each party or such party. And electronic notice, we can do things back and forth. We don't have to get original signatures until closing. And electronic delivery, everything can be electronically delivered. Choice of law, this property is in Colorado. If there's a dispute, we use Colorado law to settle it. And then the notice of acceptance and counterpart. This proposal will expire unless accepted in writing by the buyer and seller, as evidenced by their signatures below. In that last paragraph, good faith. Everybody's acting in good faith. Nobody's playing games. Everybody goes to a closing to find a way to make it happen. Nobody goes to a closing to kill it. That happens before the closing. And then we have additional provisions. Purchaser is a licensed real estate broker for the state of Colorado. Something like that would go in these additional provisions. Anything can go in there. Then we have attachments, lead-based paint disclosure, any other attachments that might be a part of it. And then we have the signatures at the bottom of the page. We have the buyer's name, so the buyer signs it. Now let's flip to the next page. We have the buyer's signature, blah, blah, blah. And look at this 760. Look at this 760 here, line 760. If the seller is being, if this sale is being converted or rejected, countered or rejected, the guy's either going to counter it or just plain reject it. He should not sign this contract. Guaranteed question on the state exam. If the seller, remember the buyer has to have it signed, it's not an offer.
Right.
So the buyer has to sign it. But if it's going to be countered by the seller, or if the seller is just going to reject it, then he doesn't sign it. The seller does not sign it. You will have that question. Easy question, don't miss it. Common sense. And then we have down here, end of the contract. Have we signed anything?
Nope.
We haven't signed squat, have we? I like it.
Does that mean we don't have to keep a copy of these?
No, we keep a copy of anything we sign.
Right, but we didn't sign this. so-
Well, not yet, but we're going to in a minute. We're going to in a minute. So we're not a party to the contract, but then down below here, we have the broker's acknowledgements. And the broker does or does not acknowledge receipt of the earnest money. In this case, I didn't receive the earnest money. Remember, I just got a promissory note?
So you would sign in either case?
Oh, we always sign this, and the listing broker is the one who signs this, or I should say the buyer's broker. And look at down at the bottom here where it says, broker is working with the buyer as the buyer's agent or seller's agent or transaction broker. And then look at that next line. This is a change of status. And this would be a change of status because I'm working as an agent with the buyer and an agent for the seller. So I would have to present a change of status form. When? At time of contract, when the change occurs. When does the change occur? Right now, right at time of contract. So you sign the contract, everybody's so happy. Everything is signed, you're heading down the road to the closing. Now, do we have a contract yet? Both parties have signed it. We don't have a contract until all those contingencies are taken care of. Then we have a contract. It's a contract in process. What's that called? An executory contract. Write that down, guys. A contract still in process is an executory contract. A contract that's a done deal is an executed contract. It's been signed, everything's done.
Executory contract versus?
An executed contract. Executed and executory. Okay, that's the end of Lesson 7, Colorado Contracts and Regulations. Any questions before we call it?
The contract still in progress is,
A contract still in process is an executory contract. Even though it's been signed by both parties, we still have contingencies that could still cancel this contract out, don't we? Go to Lesson 8 of Colorado Contracts, the rest of you. Those of you who are just taking it for this part of the contract course. Go ahead and get your certificate and we'll go from there.